Are you in full control?
Yeah, I'm dandy.
Bring me Spider-Man, dead or alive.
What if events went differently? What if Spider-Man turned evil and Spider-Man Web of Shadows? What would have happened? What would have changed? Find out in today's fan fiction. Now, before we begin this fan fiction, this is a continuation of what could have been in Web of Shadows 2 or some kind of Web of Shadows DLC that we never ended up getting. I always wanted to see how the evil timeline would have turned out, and if you choose the evil path, what would have happened after that event with Wolverine and the symbiotes and how Spider-Man ended up taking over New York, and I thought this is how events would go down. But anyways, let's get into this. Spider-Man in one last ditch effort would ask Venom to take his hand. Venom would be weak and he would reach out for Spider-Man's hand, but Spider-Man had different plans. He would use his webs and wrap it around Venom's throat, making him choke to death, and he would blow up in the shield helicarrier. Venom was dead and Spider-Man would become more consumed with the symbiote. It was too late for the hero to turn back at this point. After everything Spider-Man did, trying not to kill people, he had become the very thing that he would want to destroy. Spider-Man would choose maximum power, becoming bigger, almost like Venom's size. The heroes like Luke Cage, Moon Knight, and MJ would see the explosion in the distance. MJ would be scared knowing Peter was on the helicarrier, and Luke Cage would tell her that nobody would be able to survive and it was too late for him. MJ would be crying and she would get on board Moon Knight's ship before the shockwave would hit the city. The shockwave would destroy buildings, creating massive destruction and power outages across the city. Hospitals, schools, homes, and prisons would have no power, and criminals would get on the streets, and there would be tons of riots with symbiotes and regular civilians. Symbiotes would invade the areas and consume as many people as possible. In one of those jails, cops would be shooting symbiotes, trying to protect somebody, and the symbiotes would be smashing into walls, breaking further into the police station until they found what they were looking for. A bigger symbiote creature would eat one of the cops in front of the cell, and there would be laughing echoing within the jail cell. The symbiotes knew they were getting closer and closer, and they would find Cletus Cassidy laughing in the jail cell. The symbiotes knew they were in the right place, and they would smash through the bars and look at Cletus. One of the symbiotes would push all of the other symbiotes out of the way, and he would look at Cletus, unbonding with one of these civilians. The red symbiote would go onto Cletus, and he would be laughing, and he would smash through the prison walls, screaming that there was going to be carnage. Spider-Man would raise his hands in the air, and the symbiotes would follow their new leader, and Black Cat would tell Spider-Man the city was now his, and Spider-Man would command the symbiotes to consume as many people as possible, and he would tell Black Cat he had unfinished business with the Kingpin and the Tinkerer. Spider-Man would yell at some of the symbiotes, and he would pick up the strongest ones, and they would follow him to Fisk Tower. The Kingpin's agents would find a beaten down symbiote Wolverine at the church, and they would take him in, locking him in a cement cube. Kingpin would tell Wolverine if he could control the symbiote, and Wolverine would agree, saying he was able to, and Kingpin would tell Logan that it was the end of days, but before the days would end, he had a common enemy, and it was Spider-Man. He would continue explaining that Spider-Man had betrayed them all, and he destroyed the machine that was going to save the city. Kingpin told Wolverine that he wanted him to use the symbiote for its power to take on Spider-Man, and in time, they would fix the machine and detonate it, bringing order to the city and an end to the symbiote apocalypse once and for all. Wolverine would agree, and he would smash out of the cube and look at Kingpin, awaiting his instructions. They would hear a noise in the distance, and it would be Moon Knight's ship. They would land, and Wolverine would put his claws out, but Kingpin would yell at him, telling him to wait. The door from the ship would open, and Black Widow would have a gun pointed at whoever was coming out of that ship. Luke Cage, Moon Knight, and Mary Jane would walk out of the ship, and Moon Knight would see a symbiote Wolverine, and he would look around, looking at Kingpin. He thought something wasn't right here. He didn't know what it was, but he had a bad feeling. He would charge at them, and Luke Cage would yell at Moon Knight, telling him to stop, but it was too late. He would kick Wolverine in the face, and he would do a backflip, kicking him in the the legs and he would fall to the ground. Wolverine would explain that he didn't want this fight and he would use the symbiote tendrils to grab him and pull him towards his claws, and he would gut Moon Knight. Moon Knight would be stabbed in the gut and he would fall to the ground bleeding. Luke Cage would rush at Wolverine, saying that that was a bad idea, and Kingpin would grab MJ, telling her to watch this demonstration of symbiote power, and Wolverine would claw Luke Cage, but Luke Cage wasn't fazed by it, and he would punch Wolverine, making him fly back, falling almost off of the building. Luke Cage would run at Wolverine, trying to push him off the building, but Wolverine would do a spinning backflip and kick him in the legs. Luke Cage would be stunned, and Wolverine would throw his symbiote at him, and it would try bonding with Luke Cage, and he would be screaming, trying to rip the symbiote off, but it would bond with him, and Luke Cage would smile. Wolverine would kick him in the chest, and he would fall off the building to his death. MJ would be screaming, trying to punch the Kingpin, but Kingpin would take her arm, telling her not to be scared, and Moon Knight was bleeding from his gut, and he would be holding his stomach. He would be on his knees and pleading with Wolverine, telling him the symbiote was changing his train of thought and that he had to get rid of it before it was too late. Kingpin would order Wolverine to kill him, saying that he was working with Spider-Man, and Wolverine would look at MJ, knowing that that was Spider-Man's girlfriend. He would look within himself, and he would look within the symbiote to get information. Kingpin was telling the truth. He was right, and Wolverine would extend his claws and cut Moon Knight's head clean off, and he would kick his body to the ground, and his head would roll off the building. His body would collapse on the ground with blood spilling everywhere. MJ would scream and cry, and Kingpin would tell Black Widow to take her away, and Black Widow and some of Kingpin's agents would leave with MJ. They would go into the building. Kingpin told Wolverine if it was possible to bring Spider-Man in alive, and symbiote Wolverine would tell him it shouldn't be an issue. He was going to rip his symbiote off of him bit by bit, just like what he did to him, and Kingpin would laugh, saying good, and he would tell him to leave and finish the work. Kingpin would go into the building and they would work on the plan to rebuild the device and secure New York City once again. Symbiote Wolverine would smell something in the distance. They were coming for him. He would be surprised and he would see the symbiotes swinging towards him. They were getting closer and closer, and symbiote Wolverine would take his claws out, ready to face them all at once. Spider-Man would web zip and he would do a massive front flip in the air, going to the other side of the tower, and Wolverine would try slashing his leg, but it was too late. Spider-Man would land on the ground and the ground would start to crack and shake. The other symbiotes would crawl on the wall and they would start to circle Wolverine. Spider-Man would tell Wolverine he was shocked to see him once again, and he was going to ask where Kingpin was. Symbiote Wolverine would scream at Spider-Man, and he would tell Spider-Man he wasn't going to be getting a free pass this time. Oh no, he was going to be getting the biggest beatdown he has ever had before. Spider-Man would tell Wolverine to bring it on, and Wolverine would charge and scream at Spider-Man. Spider-Man would use a symbiote whip, but it would be cut clean off by one of Wolverine's claws, and Wolverine would be attacked from behind by other symbiotes, but he would claw through them like butter. He would use symbiote webs and he would throw the symbiotes at Spider-Man, and Spider-Man would be sent back into a wall, and Spider-Man would fall right onto the ground. Wolverine would jump quickly, and as Spider-Man was about to get up, Wolverine would kick him in the face and pick him up, throwing him into the ground, and the ground would crack everywhere. He would be stabbing him again and again, and Spider-Man would be thrown back into a wall, and other symbiotes would rush Wolverine, but some of Kingpin's agents would use gliders in the air, stunning them, and the symbiotes would catch on fire. The rest of the symbiotes would retreat in the air, seeing Spider-Man was on the ground pretty much defeated. Spider-Man would look around, crawling, trying to get to his feet. He was angry and he wanted revenge. He would tell Wolverine if he wanted to meet his new girlfriend, and Spider-Man would yell cat, but there would be silence. Black Cat's body would be thrown into the two Kingpin agents, and they would fall off their gliders, and the gliders would blow up in the air. They would fall to their deaths. There would be a massive explosion, and Cat's body would fall onto the ground almost lifeless. Wolverine would be confused, and Spider-Man would also be confused. They didn't know what was happening here. Spider-Man in time would break free, and he would grab Wolverine with all of his strength and throw him into the concrete cube, and he would punch a hole through it, and Wolverine would be knocked out. Spider-Man would run to Black Cat, and she would tell Spider-Man he was coming and he was here. Spider-Man would be kicked in the back of the head, and symbiote tendrils would choke him in the neck. Spider-Man would be thrown to the ground. He was blacking out, and he could see other symbiotes standing there. He was betrayed. The symbiotes would move out of the way, and it was Carnage. He was laughing and he was walking towards Spider-Man, and he would take Black Cat's useless body and use a symbiote act to finish the job. Her body would fall back to the ground lifeless, and Carnage would use symbiote tendrils to pick Spider-Man up. He would tell Spider-Man he was weak, just like Brock, and he would start laughing, saying he was happy he finished Brock off, but without him now, he couldn't be beaten. Carnage would tell Spider-Man he was going to finish the job once and for all, and he would thank him for letting him do all the hard work just so he could take it away from him. He would pull tighter on his neck, and Spider-Man was trying to break free, but he couldn't. He was too weak. Carnage was right. Wolverine would get back up and throw a part of the cube at Carnage, but Carnage would use a symbiote shield to block it, and he would look at Spider-Man, draining his symbiote, and he would be screaming, yelling. It was the worst pain Spider-Man had ever experienced in his life. Other Carnage symbiotes would rush Wolverine, and they would take him on. Carnage would see a ripped up red and blue Spider-Man suit, and he would be laughing, saying the original Spider-Man was finally back, and he would throw him off of the building. Spider-Man would fall far, and he would fall fast. He would use his hands to try to catch the building, but he was too weak. He would black out and fall to the ground below. Carnage would order the rest of the symbiotes to find the machine in the building and the thing that they were looking for so they could destroy it and so that their plan couldn't be ruined. They would break into the glass and they would be fighting Kingpin's agents. The war had truly begun. Symbiote Wolverine would kill the Carnage symbiotes, and he would be going toe-to-toe with Carnage. Carnage would be making jokes, saying that he was finally going to kill his first X-Men, and that he was going to be happy to see Wolverine finally die. Wolverine would try slashing Carnage, but Carnage would dodge the attack and use a symbiote axe, cutting Wolverine's arm right off. He would knee him in the face, and Wolverine would fall back on the ground. Carnage would pick him up by his chest, and the symbiote would start ripping in Carnage's hand. He would start laughing, saying no more bad symbiotes, and he would drain the symbiote, throwing Wolverine into a wall, and Carnage would take parts of the cube and shove it into Wolverine's gut, impaling him. Spider-Man would be down below crawling, and he would be in his old costume. It was completely wrecked with symbiote stains and blood. He could think again, like what he used to think, or that's what he thought. He could look around, seeing what he did to the city. What did he do? Why did he do this? It was too late for him. He was being circled, and the symbiotes were circling him. He knew this wasn't good, and Spider-Man would fight symbiotes down below by the hundreds, and Spider-Man would see a massive symbiote in the fire and in the distance. It was Luke Cage. He would throw cars at Spider-Man, and Spider-Man would dodge them but would be caught in an explosion, and he would be thrown into the wall, falling on the ground. Spider-Man would see a symbiote on the ground, and he would extend his hand, rebonding with the symbiote. He was weak from everything, but a lot of his injuries would heal fast. More symbiotes would circle him, and he would yell, telling the other symbiotes he was his leader, but they would look around and they would betray Spider-Man. Carnage was their new leader now. He would fight them off, trying his best to take them all out, and he would even fight Luke Cage. Carnage would smash into the Kingpin's tower, and he would cut people's heads off in the hallway, and he would throw thugs out of the windows, laughing. Kingpin and the Tinker would have the machine rebuilt, and they would press a button for all of the cell doors in the building to finally shut. Carnage was chasing Black Widow and MJ, and Black Widow would push MJ into the door in time, but Carnage would use a symbiote whip to grab Black Widow's leg, and she would be dragged, and Carnage would use a symbiote knife, stabbing her in the throat. She was dead. He would leap into the door, but the Kingpin would shut the door in time, and the Kingpin would start a self-destruct button in the building, and he would grab MJ in time, and they would go off into a jet, and this jet would have a massive sonic nuke, and it would be going into the city, and it would finally work. All three would go into the jet, and a part of the building would move out of the way, and they would shoot off into the air. Spider-Man would be fighting till his last breath, and the hordes of the symbiotes would overpower him. Spider-Man would look in the air to see a jet in the sky go off from the Kingpin's tower. He ended up failing. His revenge. He couldn't even get the Kingpin in time. And MJ would look to see Peter fighting off symbiotes, and she would have a tear in her eye. Wolverine would look in the sky, seeing this jet go off, and he could finally see this madness was going to end once and for all, and he would shut his eyes. Spider-Man down below would be lashed in the leg with a symbiote axe, and he would fall on one leg. Symbiote Luke Cage would kick his other leg to the ground, but Spider-Man would try his best using the rest of his powers to fight off the symbiotes, but it was just too much. Another Carnage symbiote would claw him in the back, ripping parts of his symbiote, and symbiote Luke Cage would pick Spider-Man up by his throat while other symbiotes were clawing into his legs and into his back. attack. The symbiotes would tear his symbiote off bit by bit, and Spider-Man would use the rest of his webs to fight the hordes of the symbiotes off, and symbiote Luke Cage would do a backbreaker, draining Spider-Man's symbiote off, and he would throw him to the ground. The horde of symbiotes would be looking at Spider-Man while Spider-Man was on the ground. He was dead. Carnage would be laughing and he would smash the door in, looking around, and he would see a self-destruct countdown go off, and the symbiotes below would be looking at something go off, and the building would blow up, killing everybody in the building and down below. They would drop the sonic nuke in the city and it would blow up, destroying all of the symbiotes. They would clean up the city weeks later with heroes like the Fantastic Four, and they would help repay for damages. There was about $10 billion in damages at New York City, and they would explain in a conference that they couldn't find Spider-Man's body and that he wasn't found, so they don't really know what happened to him. And MJ would go to Peter Parker's grave after everything that happened, and she would be crying, knowing the symbiote got to him and that Venom took over his mind. She would put flowers over his grave, saying she forgave him for everything he did. She would walk away and a young kid would walk towards the grave. It was Miles Morales, and he would put a mask over the grave, and it was a Spider-Man mask. It was saying, "Forgive and forget." Back at Scarlet Spider Dimension 2.0, Madam Web would reverse time before the blast, and she would capture this alternate version of Spider-Man, putting a more secure symbiote suit on for him for the coming battle for all of reality. The end. And that's the fan fiction. I'm very excited to finally release this. This is something that I really wanted to do. And, you know, I've always wanted to see, like, if there was going to be some kind of, like, Web of Shadows 2 or some kind of, like, Web of Shadows DLC where, you know, you would choose the evil path and you would fight Wolverine or do some kind of thing like that. So I thought I would make a fan fiction on Web of Shadows 2 and kind of do a continuation story. So I'm kind of happy where I ended up leading off to this story and how I wanted to end it. And that's kind of like Scarlet Spider Dimension 2.0 thing is kind of like a crossover to my 1994 animated fan fiction, so a lot of you guys are probably going to know like what happened with that if you ended up watching that fan fiction actually like last month. But anyways, I'm very happy with the turnout, and if you guys do have fan fictions to request, do make sure to request them in the comments down below. And if you guys did enjoy this video, do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn your notifications on so you and your friends are all up to date with the latest content. But anyways, as always guys, I will try to put as many fan fictions out as I can. I'm going to try to get once a week out. But anyways, again, thank you for your patience, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.